Hello, everyone. Really excellent to be here. See quite a few old friends, some new friends, old energy, new energy, and feed from that. It's amazing, I think, the momentum that Slush has had over the last 5 years, creating something that's grounded, moving forward, and it's a pleasure to be here. It's also a very apt day to ship some product. So the Nokia Lumia 920, our flagship product, ships today in Finland. So, thanks. What I thought I'd do with you this morning is talk a little bit about our principles and how we design at Nokia, both in terms of industrial design and the user experience as a whole. So product design, what are the principles we build from? Then I'm going to talk a bit about location, motion, and here. And then coming here made me think again about what larger companies and cultures might learn from the startup world. And I wanted to share a few thoughts on that and maybe spark some thinking. We're a global company, international design team, but in some senses we're very much a product of Finland. And in the current, amongst high-tech startups, it can sound odd to go way back, but let me start with some of the grand figures in Finnish design and what I think we draw from them in terms of principles. The first one is Alvar Aalto, architect, designer. And Aalto had a saying which resonates very much with me. He said that the role of the architect and the designer is to give a gentler structure to life. And the way I interpret that is you work on those things that people do every day, 50 to 100 times a day, and you improve those. That's innovation, refining those and making them better. In the connected digital experience today, there are so many things that still suck that can be improved by just incrementally doing things. Sometimes it can require heroic things in the background, but the idea is rather than only looking for completely new experiences and weirdo features that allow you to do something you have never done before, that wows you for a moment and is good as party tricks, but you'll never use again, polish those things that happen every day. In the case of smartphones today, photography still is way worse than it could be. Most photos are blurry, low-light photographs are very poor. We're fixing those kinds of things that you do every day. The second, and perhaps not so well known to the international audience, is Tapio Virkkala, who was a sculptor as well as an industrial designer. And Virkkala had this saying that every material has its own unwritten law. And so this means you take a material and you work with it with its foundation and what it wants to be, in effect. And we take that very seriously, for example, in the products we now do in premium plastics, polycarbonate, how we're using those materials' best properties and designing from the inside out based on those. But it also applies to digital design and applications. Digital experiences should be authentically digital, not mimicking the real world, or they should be freshly and authentically digital. Digital things are stuff to be designed with, just material, just like physical ones. And then third, sometimes called the conscience of Finnish design, Kai Frank. Kai Frank almost single-handedly changed Finnish eating by creating this series of tableware, Teema. And starting from a very decorative style early on in his career, he ended up with something where you literally take everything unnecessary away, distill to the essential, and almost the only decoration is color. And this kind of attention to detail and finishing is very important. Interestingly, he also had to explain to the Finnish population at that time, and this involved a lot of retail work, that you can actually do with fewer dishes, fewer place settings, and in that process, change what we thought was acceptable and what was necessary. Now, if we take these people in the background, what are the kind of values and principles we endorse in the studio as we do our work and when we worked on the Lumia 920? There are four main things in terms of values. The first value, which is, I think, foundational to all of them, is we want to make it pure. This means, like I just talked about, Frank, you take away everything unnecessary until you're left with only the essential things. And that means if you're designing something like the 920, you refine and take everything away. This is essentially a product built out of two pieces, the polycarbonate inherent color monobody and then the glass that flows into the product. And after that, every single detail counts. The ceramic detailing on the keys, the speakers, how the display really folds into the body. And you polish those and refine those. So that's pure. The other one is what we call built better. It's a fundamental goal for us to make the products solid, that you can feel comfortable taking them outside, robust. In a way, this isn't something you need to put in a parka to feel that it'll survive the environment. And it also has to do with refining constantly how we're assembling the products, because the truth is that true design innovation, if you make a breakthrough in terms of how an experience in a product is built, you need to change the enablers and building blocks on how you do it. There's significant work in getting an assembly like this to work and be reliable. Then, our products are human. By human, we mean that they are never cold. They don't look cold, they don't feel cold. They feel great in the hand. And there's a particular tension in the Lumia 920 and this approach that we started with the N9 brought to the Lumia 800. You look at this product from the front, it looks like a hard-edged rectangle, almost like a plank, piece of wood. You'd expect it to have hard edges, but nothing could be further from the truth. You then turn it around, it's a extruded shape, soft tapered ends, almost pillowy. We have a sort of chat in the studio that it's a product that might as well could have grown out in nature, might have grown on a tree rather than come off of a production line. And that organic, natural quality is fundamental to it. So while we do take everything away, reduce to only what's essential, then you still make sure that it has that human quality. And human, yet advanced. And by advanced means that the product is about tomorrow's technology, always pointing towards the next thing, not today's technology. And what does that mean in the case of the Lumia 920? It starts with photography. So I referred to the blurry photographs and low light photographs. So we have optical image stabilization with literally a physical floating lens and all of the hardware-software integration to take the best blur-free, low-light photographs of any smartphone at this time. And it's not limited to photography. That's one important pillar. The other is solving another daily thing like charging. So wireless charging and connectivity. To charge the 920, you just have to put it on the wireless charging pad or on a product that has that pad inbuilt to it, like some of our speakers, and it charges. Now, this kind of connectivity and making things easier extends also to the environment. So if you're listening to music on this, come home, you want to continue on the speaker, you just touch the NFC-enabled speaker. Now, the technology is NFC, Bluetooth, handshaking, but a person doesn't need to know anything about that. You just touch the speaker and it continues. This is a way of using the world as your interface. But the area perhaps where we're driving the most newness and difference, and I want to say something very clearly. There's a lot of talk in our industry about differentiation. That's a kind of industry word. We sometimes use it as well, but in the studio, it's very clear amongst designers that making something new and different in and of itself is not interesting. Different is not interesting. Making something meaningfully different, meaningfully better, is what's interesting. And the area where we're doing that significantly is in location and motion. Many of you may have heard we announced a new brand and identity for all of our location cloud assets last week in San Francisco. And I just wanted to talk through that and explain that. So adding to our products the dimension of location and motion, starting with maps. Now the conversation about maps and maps on smartphones has changed in the last few weeks to talk about quality and quality of data. And quality of maps and real-time maps and keeping the data live is a real challenge. It starts with industrial-grade investments. We've been doing this for several decades, coming from the acquisition of Navtech. So you need, first of all, an industrial-grade driving around with cars, getting 3D point cloud, 3D street-level imagery. We just announced an acquisition of a company called Earthmind that allows us to do that even better. And so this is a significant industrial investment to make essentially a digital model of the world and to keep that live and accurate. Making such a digital representation of the world is hard work. It only starts with this industrial cars driving around modeling the world. Equally important is having a significant usage of the applications and services constantly improving with data. We're getting on the order of 2.7 million updates to the data in the Here cloud every day. Now, these data sources then need to be combined. In fact, we have over 80,000 data sources in the Here cloud. All of these need to be built into a single model, and this model is constantly updating. So essentially, think of it as building a digital abstraction of the entire physical world. That's what the Here cloud is. There are only two companies doing this, Nokia and Google. But it doesn't stop there either. Then there's the community of users, particularly in areas which are not so easily covered with these industrial methods. So those are users updating, adding to the maps, fixing, but also making contributions to the maps. And in this case, we have map creation tools, and we'll be rolling out more and more products and features related to the community updating the information. And then local data sources as well in the mix. So the clear thing is that we will put the premier experience of location on Nokia Lumia products in Windows Phone and also on our mobile phones. Many of them have today preloaded maps. And the first key thing is the quality of the data and making sure that that's continuing to be better. But then it's a suite of experiences starting from maps, then drive navigation specifically in more countries, in more native languages than anyone else, public transport. And the key thing here is that the apps and experiences, while you can launch them separately, they're completely connected. And you can go seamlessly from one to the other. And one thing, particularly in the Windows Phone user interface, you can do is you can pin certain elements from deep in the applications onto the start screen. One example is those places on the route of your daily commute, for example, a bus stop or a metro stop, you can pin that to start and you can see real-time updates on the data in those cities that we have them. This doesn't require you to find anything, find an app or anything like that. The experience is completely tied together. The most forward-looking area is what we've called an app City Lens, and we've actually introduced now the technology, the enabling technology, also for building other apps, which we call Live Site. And this essentially is using the viewfinder of the phone as an interface for finding out more about places or finding places. And the ways you can interact with it are already developing. So you take a photo, the data is overlaid immediately. You can freeze the frame and then just take that frame, still act on all the data and the information about that restaurant, this bookstore, whatever it might be, so you don't have to hold it up constantly. This is, I think, an important development in using sight as an interface and pointing to the world as a way to frame data. But what I said about the platform as a whole and keeping it real-time and up-to-date, it's very important that we go horizontal, that we get as many people to use the data and to update its quality and give this experience to as many people as possible, regardless of whether they've switched to a Nokia Lumia. So what we announced next week is here.com, full WebGL implementation. Also, the Here app is in the iPhone and iPad App Store at the moment, available for download for those that want to try. We also announced that we will introduce an SDK for Android OEM vendors soon in the new year, as well as we will integrate deeply the Here Cloud and capabilities into the new Firefox OS. We're already, the maps from Here are powering 4 out of 5 in-car navigation systems around the world. So if you're in a car, it has an embedded navigation system. 4 out of 5 are already running on the Here Cloud location data. Now, in addition to that, Yahoo, Bing Maps, Rand McNally, MapQuest are all using the data. And now we just make it broader and further across the portfolio. And this is the big development, making it available, and this creates that virtual cycle of capturing these data sources, improving it, computing the maps into key experiences, the best of which will be on Windows Phone, but the quality of the maps will be available broadly, and then better experiences. Just as a close, I promised I'd say a few things about startup culture and energy and techniques and what that might mean for big companies. And I phrased it in terms of tiny lessons for the big. Okay? Tiny lesson number 1. Invent language. What I mean by invent language is one of the few tools that you have is creating energy via the concepts and categories you use as you're starting a startup. Creating a name for the field that is growing in which you are playing, or giving a name for the approach you take in a given field. Let me just give a few examples. I'll start with one. Some of you know, prior to joining Nokia, I was co-founder and CEO of Dopplr. And the Dopplr logo, which Dopplr is a service for frequent travelers and that are building a kind of social atlas of the world, making collections of places. Now, the logo was 6 colored squares. Very early on, we decided that every city and place in Dopplr, every city, should have its own color. And then what we did was we started tuning the logo based on your travel patterns. So as you were traveling, the logo changed to reflect that. So the color changed to be you. We mixed your data with the service identity. It was still very recognizable. Now, somebody, particularly perhaps of a quite engineering bent, might say, like, why is that interesting? People loved it when they discovered it. It meant that we take the data seriously, and the data is reflected here. We called it utility. At the time, Face was calling itself a social utility. We didn't want to be a plumbing company, so say we do beauty and utility at the same time. The other word we coined by accident over Friday beers was the Silicon Roundabout. Old Street Roundabout in London. Our CTO said, where are we today? He said, hey, maybe we're at the Silicon Roundabout. Next day it was in the FT, the Telegraph. And the rest, unfortunately, meant higher rents for the startup community around Old Street, but also a lot of positive momentum, right? So what is that word for kurvi here? You can think of that in certain manner. So invent language, creates energy. Tiny lesson number 2, build culture every day. What I mean by that is you have the luxury when you start up of creating culture, and every single meeting, every single handshake, everything you do, every product decision you make creates a view of how you work together. And that's one of the few competitive things that you have that you can control. Be very deliberate about that. That I learned from some key early colleagues while working in the startup world. And the same applies as you go bigger. You need to find ways of tweaking that culture, but it starts with every single day. You're not outside the culture you create, you're in it. And the third is do it and plan less. Joey Ito, somebody who I greatly respect from the MIT Media Lab, currently the head of the MIT Media Lab, put it well when he gave a talk at the Nokia Design Studio here. He said, the cost of assessing risk is now often greater than the cost of failing. So in some software projects, the cost of planning and risk assessment is over half of the total cost. Might be a good idea just to do two things and see which one sticks. And I think that's the spirit right now we're taking internally, and it shows with the products and the speed at which we're shipping, like the 920 today. Thank you very much for your attention.